It started with the Brexit campaign. Now, a battle of values is playing out here on the continent. The European Parliament, for the first time ever, voting to sanction Hungary for flouting the democratic values it signed on to when it joined the EU in 2004. So what happens next, and who is next? Poland, perhaps soon Romania, also in the crosshairs of those who worry that a blind eye to basic rule of law will ultimately reduce Europe to a mercantile free trade zone, which is what some espouse. Or should the EU, well, just be a smaller club? Those are some of the options. Recently, while Viktor Orban was touting his anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim view of, quote, illiberal democracy on a visit to Italy's far-right Deputy PM Matteo Salvini, France's president was in Northern Europe to rally the opposite camp. Who is winning this battle of values? How will history remember this moment? Today in the France 24 debate, we are looking at what you could call a battle of values. And joining us here in the studio, Yves Bertoncini, president of Mouvement Européen France, European Movement France, an advocacy group which tries to inform citizens on what the EU is all about, right?
Yes, and to forge proposal for the construction of Europe, and also, organize contradictory public debate on all European issues.
Joining us from Warsaw, we welcome back Dominik Tarczyński, member of the Polish Parliament for the ruling Law and Justice Party there.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
From Rome, Lorenzo Marsili, the author of Citizens of Nowhere, How to Save Europe from Itself, also a co-founder of the pan-European political movement DiEM25. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It is, and it is an acronym for Democracy in Europe Movement, which is precisely what we need in our continent.
All right, we'll be talking about that in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. They needed a two-thirds majority, and they got it. European lawmakers voting 448 for, 197 against. They're asking the European Commission to launch the so-called Article 7 procedure, which could lead to the suspension of Hungary's EU voting rights. A first. Now, on the eve of the vote, Tuesday, Hungary's Prime Minister, going to Strasbourg to the Parliament, he engaged in some testy exchanges with lawmakers.
Let's be honest between each other. The inconvenient truth is that under these circumstances, it would be impossible today, Mr. Orban, that Hungary can join the European Union. That is the reality of today.
Orban. I reject that the European Parliament forces us to support immigration and migrants, threatens us, blackmails us with untrue accusations that defame Hungary and the Hungarian people. Hungary will not give in to extortion. Hungary will defend its borders, stop illegal immigration, and will protect its rights, if needed, from you.
A very virulent debate we witnessed on Tuesday, more than usual, in the European Parliament. And it was a lot along the lines of what we heard in the run-up to the Brexit vote, which is, this is a sovereignty matter, was the Hungarian Prime Minister's argument, and also bring it back to that issue of migration.
Yes, but, I mean, Viktor Orban is obsessed by migration. This can be explained since in 2015 there was a massive inflow of refugees, not to Hungary, but through Hungary to Germany, and it created anarchy there. And of course, it was a political shock for many people in Central Europe, including in Hungary. But as for today, it's for political reasons that this keeps on insisting on migration, since there's no migrant coming to Hungary any longer. And what is at stake actually is not that. It's something else. It's the rule of law in Hungary, respect of democracy, media independence, independence of justice. That is at stake. That's why this Article 7 is all about, basically. It was not about migrants' protection. So he's under scrutiny for this reason. He rejects this for, reasons of sovereignty, because he believes that, well, there should be no interference from Brussels or from Berlin and Paris on this. But his tactical coup is to insist and to transform this into a debate on migration, which I think it's not the case.
Not the case. Orban, winning election in 2010. What's changed in Hungary since, concretely?
Well, You mean in terms of media independence? Well, I know some media newspaper, Nasbarabak, for example, who was totally closed, either directly or indirectly, sponsors not giving any, money again for advertising. In terms of justice independence, there are serious issues. I mean, this has been scrutinized by the EU very, very carefully. But what changed for him politically is that he was losing ground, actually, Viktor Orban, before the refugee crisis. The refugee crisis was a shock for his population, and he used it, of course, to protect Hungary, but also to save his power and to reinforce his power. And while doing this, he created a kind of autocratic system in Hungary, which is now under attack from Brussels and other capitals of the EU, because it's not consistent with the EU values. And Guy Verhofstadt was very right in saying that should Hungary be out of the EU today,
should it be applying today?
Today, like Turkey, for example, it would be refused.
Dominic Tarczynski, members of the European Parliament from your party voted against the call for Article 7. Why?
Well, first of all, because Article 7 in this case is just a political tool. Ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do about values, because the leftists in the European Parliament, they do not have any values. They are obsessed about conservatives. They are obsessed about those who are elected, and they are obsessed about anything which is against their leftist way of thinking. Verhofstadt, you're a loser. You're a loser. You are the one who cannot be accepted by your own country. Timmermans, you are a loser. You are not accepted by your own country. Your own party is like 5%. You nearly get into the parliament. And Mr. Orban was accepted by over 50%. He's got constitutional majority. And you are trying to tell him and tell us, Polish, about democracy. Come and learn how to get support from the nation. So again, it has nothing to do about the values, and these losers will lose soon. Thank God we are having elections in May 2019. We're going to wash you out, all of you leftists who hate democracy.
But it's not just people.
Our nation are supporting us.
It's not just people on the left, though,
it's not funny at all. I wouldn't laugh.
It's not just people on the left who voted, Dominic, for this measure. The Fidesz party of Viktor Orban sits with the center-right EPP bloc. Most of the by a 2/3 majority, those within the EPP voted for sanctions against Hungary. How do you explain that?
What about how would you explain constitutional majority? What about people who voted for Mr. Orban? How would you explain that? How would you explain most of the Polish who elected Law and Justice in such a huge number that we don't need a coalition? How would you explain that Mr. Timmermans got 5%, Law and Justice 50%, and Mr. Orban nearly 60%? How would you explain that? I'll explain you how they vote. They vote by money which are paid, which are paid by the people which are paid by George Soros. They are selling themselves. They are selling themselves by support. And they're crying now, oh, we do not have advertisements from the government. We do not have this or that. It's all about money. It's all about dirty hands. And it has nothing to do about values. So we will support Mr. Orban. We will support Czech Republic. We will support Italy. And one more thing. You mentioned that European Union might be a smaller club. France and Germany will stay alone, not 28 countries. 2, you will stay alone if you will try to rule European Union, and the rest as you would own us. You do not own us. Remember that.
Lorenzo Marsili, your reading of today's vote.
Well, I take note that there is a leftist majority in the European Parliament. I should say that if I had noticed that earlier on, we could have done something quite more ambitious during the financial crisis. But more seriously, I think our Polish friend is correct in saying that this is about money as much as it is about liberties. We should not forget that Hungary is the closest that a country in the European Union gets to a kleptocratic state, a state where a small political elite, Viktor Orban and the clique that surrounds him and the Fidesz party, are virtually controlling the vast majority
and
of
millions of
European
Hungarians who voted for him
that enter into the country and are utilizing European structural funds in order to build a clientelistic state that delivers economic goods in exchange for political and electoral retribution. This is a model very similar to that of another elected leader whom I believe must be an idol of our Polish friend, Vladimir Putin. There is perhaps a little bit of a contradiction Poland and Russia, which we can fly over right at the moment. So part of it is about money. Hungary is misusing European funds and is using those funds in order to create a captured illiberal state. And part of it is about freedom, about democracy. Hungary in the last 10 years has put the constitutional court under political control, just as the Polish government is currently trying to do. It has put the virtual totality of the media of the country under control of the ruling government. It has passed a law that makes it next to impossible for free citizens, civil society organizations, and NGOs to organize in the country, whether that is to provide shelter for migrants or support for victims of violence or support for women. This is not.
What are you talking about? What country are you talking about?
That the European Union is to be made of. And I think today's European Parliament decision is to be saluted as the first time that the EU has not only sanctioned budget deficits, but has finally sanctioned deficits in liberty, in democracy, and in fundamental values. This is what the European Union should stand for.
And of course, the question now is what happens next? It's now up to the Commission for a procedure that would take the European Union, well, into uncharted territory, as Yenna Lee explains.
Created to deter member states to fall into anti-democratic habits, Article 7 of the Lisbon Treaty is a disciplinary procedure that punishes countries who don't adhere to the bloc's values. Values defined in a previous article that includes wording such as freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rights of minorities. The European Parliament, Commission, or a third of EU countries can propose to trigger Article 7. This when they judge that there's been a clear risk of a serious breach of EU values. It needs a 2/3 majority in Parliament and 4/5 in the EU Council to pass. Once triggered, the Council is in charge of verifying if the accused country is following its recommendations. If not, more voting takes place to kick off a sanctions phase, a key necessity being a unanimous vote in the European Council. In the end, a qualified majority in the EU Council, that's 55% of EU countries representing at least 65% of the EU population, is needed to trigger sanctions. Punishments that can include the suspension of voting rights, meaning that the targeted country won't be able to have its say on European decisions. The first country to be targeted with an Article 7 procedure was Poland in December 2017. Accused of undermining judicial independence, the Polish government is under EU scrutiny, but hasn't been stripped of its voting rights.
Maybe we'll talk about Poland a little bit later. But first, Lorenzo Marsili, after this vote that we saw in the European Parliament, you saluted. But watching that report, you get the sense, well, it's just symbolic. After all, they're never going to have 28 nations agreeing to the triggering of Article 7.
Well, you see, I think you're hitting one of the great stumbling blocks of the European Union today, not only concerning the protection of fundamental rights, but more generally regarding any policy that is able to lift this continent out of its political and economic crisis. What we have seen...
We are not in a crisis. Poland is not in a crisis. We've got the lowest unemployment ever. You're in a crisis.
What we have seen recently is that on the one side, the European Parliament manages to represent the collective interests of Europeans. The European Parliament has passed an ambitious reform to the Dublin regulation and provided a blueprint of a united European migration policy that would solve the problems that we're witnessing and that we have witnessed over the summer. The European Parliament has repeatedly demanded to shut down tax havens, 5 of which are within the European Union, that are draining up to 1 trillion euros of taxable income from European Union member states.
If I may reply.
All these policy choices are constantly blocked, as you rightly say, by the European Council itself. So what is it that we really see? On the one hand, a transnational democracy that tries to represent the collective interests of Europeans. And on the other side, 27 or 28 heads of state and government that meet in secret in a zero-sum game of reciprocal vetoes that are unable to give life to any of those policies that would be to the benefit of the vast majority of European citizens.
Can I reply,
That is
please?
why the solution for our continent is a genuine democratization. We need more European Parliament, more transnational democracy, and less of the Vienna Congress-style international democracy represented by the European Council.
Very quickly, Dominic Tarczynski, because we have to go to the break. Your rebuttal.
So, very quickly, it's not European Union which is in crisis. It's this who are in crisis. The lowest unemployment ever in Poland, 4%. The biggest boom, economical boom ever. We need people to work. How about Italy? How about Greece? How about Portugal? How about Spain? All of them are facing problems because of the leftist government from the past. And we are not facing any problems. Hungary not facing any kind of economic problems. You do have a problem because of your leftist way of thinking. So please do not put us into the box of the crisis, because we are
I love the fact
we do
that
not
the
have
Honourable
any terrorist attacks. We do not have
is run
any
by the left
terror
wing.
attacks. We haven't
I dare tell
had
you that
any
the
terror
has been
attacks. Do
covered by Pride
do
for the
not
last 10
disturb.
years.
I know the truth is painful, but do not disturb, please.
All right,
So,
we're gonna pick up on these.
haven't
We're gonna
had
pick up on these
any
points when we come
terrorist
back.
attack
We have to
because we are
take
smart.
we have to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching the France 2040.